It's nice to meet you. That because we never met before, so it's a good occasion to meet you. And I am a big fan of your work.
Thank you very much.
And I know from the first beginning when I came to Ballinglen, because there was a piece in Una's office. So
the stack,
yeah, with the green hill and and that's a very strong piece, because everybody came to Ballinglen has this sensation of this green and the seaside. It's very strong.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
And this to be over the seaside, so that's very impressive. And then I was looking about in your homepage and your work and but tell before about this piece how you were feeling there when you came.
Yeah, so Nataly, I arrived into Ballinglen in 1997 in the winter, in December.
It's a good month.
I gotten, but I wanted to spread it over the different seasons of the year if possible.
Yes.
So in fact, I spread it over 3 seasons: the winter, the spring, and the summer. And it was in the spring of '98, so on our second return, I remember driving out with Linda and our 2 kids to Belderrick, and just before we got there, I think it must be the stack. I think is not terribly far from the KG fields, and I remember seeing this small little thing jutting up above the headland, above the field. We stopped the car. I climbed over the fencing and ran across the field. And I couldn't believe it. It was like a child. I know the kids and Linda were laughing at me.
It's like a shock, isn't it, to see?
Oh, it's unbelievable. But it was like it was waiting for me. It was like something that I very much wanted to see without having known that prior to that moment. And suddenly seeing this stack, and it was just standing there, sort of in the water as they do. And I was so excited. I remember running back through the field. I fell down and I got up, and I was elated. So I ended up making a number of paintings from it.
Yes. What's the black and whites you have in the collection?
The drawing is a charcoal drawing of also of a small stack or rock on the beach in Ring Row in Ealaíon. The title places it in Carrataig, but at the time, and I think maybe it's true, Ealaíon, I think, is part of the greater area of Carrataig. Maybe not now that I have more insight, but at the time, that's what I felt. So it's a beach. I don't know whether you know it. It's further out. It's on the road to Belmullet, and then you take a right and you go up to Carrataig and then further on into Ealaíon. It's a very, very beautiful area. And I have a studio there now. So in December and also part of the spring, I worked mostly fairly close to Ballinglen. And as the time went on and into the summer, I had sort of expanded my sort of area out to Rossport, Carrataig, Ealaíon, and spent most of my time there. In fact, it's very remote, but very, very beautiful. Yeah.
What I noticed is a big centralistic. How you call the central?
Central?
Central, yes. it's always a very concentrated in the center.
Yeah, I think I've so if I go back to my very early work, they were portraits of people. You know, the human form was very central in my work.
So you were fixing very much the person.
Yeah, I've always had a fascination with the single image. And one of my greatest inspirations has been Rembrandt because of his paint. So I discovered the power of paint and the mystery of paint, in fact, through Rembrandt.
Oh, it's wonderful. Have you seen the show in Amsterdam?
I have, yeah. I've seen a lot, but every time I go to London, there's a portrait hanging in the National Gallery in London, Margarita de Geer. It's a portrait he made of an older woman. It's full length, full portrait. She's holding a handkerchief in her hand, and it's the most amazing painting. And also the self-portraits in that collection are beautiful as well. And every time I go, I discover something else in the face. I discover new areas that I hadn't seen before. Changes. He changed a lot. Francis Bacon said of him that he had more or less made expressionism in painting possible.
Yes.
And I think Rembrandt moved his images around a lot. And now with time, that becomes a little bit more visible because the surface layers have become a little more transparent. And you see the changes he's made when you look fairly closely at the work. So I was always interested in the central image, you know, the portrait as a single image. And the rock in Clogallaghan is also that it's a rock, and I used to sit there and make watercolors of it or draw it. It was like some sort of presence that I wanted to try to understand and try to pin down on the surface. And certainly in that period, those images are very much part of that. As I moved on, it's really ironic as I got to know the landscape more, and then with the studio I have there, living in that area, walking the fields, the urgency to paint a moment has eased off, and I've become more and more concerned with the totality of that landscape. So the central image is less apparent
because the nature is too big.
Yes, it's become so big. I think I've become more and more concerned with the light, with the space, and with things that change constantly. I've gotten through the landscape there, and you'll be aware of this as well, through how it changes constantly and fluctuates. And I've seen stacks, you know, rocks in the water being made visible, being deleted, being partially deleted. So that landscape changes like a painter changes a painting. And I became in the last couple of years very, very obsessed with pentimenti in paintings. But it was something I discovered through that landscape. You know I was always aware of it, how I was always fascinated how painters changed paintings and how sometimes you could see the changes. But the obsession really hooked into me when I started living more in that landscape, and it was the landscape, in fact, that brought me more and more to pentimenti and paintings, because the landscape was changing so much.
In Ireland, at least.
Yeah, changing constantly. And the light seems to have a certain weight sometimes. You know, it's sometimes very tangible and sometimes even heavy. So I ended up, the more I looked at the landscape, in a strange way, the less detail I had and the less, the paintings have become very minimal.
And if the object, do you try to abstract the object, let's say the rock, or is it an enlargement into the nature, into the universe?
I think it's the latter. I don't consciously and haven't consciously tried to abstract the stacks or the rocks, but what I find is that as they sometimes almost evaporate into
the atmosphere,
the light and into the atmosphere, as the rain comes in from the Atlantic and suddenly sort of completely absorbs these huge rocks, and they slowly disappear, and you can see the rain coming. You know, if you're outside in the landscape, you have to see where you can hide.
You feel, looking at your painting, that you feel the weather, you feel the changing.
Thank you. It's been very strange because I feel that they are just as much about the stacks of Broadhaven, or that stack on Ring Road Beach in Ealaíon as they were prior, except the presence of the stags of Broadhaven is somehow, I think, and I hope, is somehow completely absorbed into the light and into the paint, so that they may be in some way less visible, but I still feel that they're very much present. Yeah.
And do you know when the painting is finished? Is that a big? Are you have sentimented that you are going on too much, but sometimes?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know any more of paintings are ever finished. You know, I don't know when they're finished.
It's a decision.
I bring them on further and further, and sometimes a lot of the details disappear, but I still feel they're very much part of they're still very much part of the painting. And then I think I stop and decide, okay, they're finished when I feel that I somehow can't do any more on that canvas, and I move on to another canvas. But they take longer to make, I think, than they used to, because there's more doubt than there was previous, maybe, and I changed things a lot. And the presence of a very sort of clear and tangible image is less central, and because of that, the paintings can change and grow a lot. Yeah, so they go on for quite a while now. But I've in the recent work I've incorporated more or less the history of the painting into the painting. This one. So it's a painting of a sunset, large. The stags of Broadhaven were also there at one time, but they're also absorbed into the cloud and into that light. But more specifically, what I mean is by the history, the sunset meant that water got a sort of a pinky orange glow from the dying sun. But at one stage, it was a little bluer, you know, down here. And what I've done, what's happened in the work anyway, is that the edges, that the image doesn't go to the edge of the canvas, and that the history of the painting remains and somehow
visible.
They've always been a lot about paint anyway, and maybe that's increased.
That's to say you are painting, it's not the representation of the landscape.
No, you're right, yeah. It's because I'm very much aware that I'm painting. But what I'm also aware of now is that the whole environment of that area in Ireland, Northwest Mayo, is so great that it influences you in lots of different ways. I think I probably make tea even different now because of it, you know. Everything you do, so it's not just about being there and being in the field. Even if I'm in my Belgian studio, I feel the landscape there and the light there is still having a huge influence on what I paint and what I see. Strangely enough, I think it's not necessarily about the specifics of that landscape, but in its totality, it suggests something much greater. And it is that greater thing that can influence a lot of people and any sort of painter, any sort of artist, because it's in its totality, it's about space and time and transience. So because it's so vast, and it's always been like that area in Mayo. Do you know the nationalist Prager? He wrote in, I think, I may be wrong in the time, but I'm thinking maybe 1950 or 60, something like that. He wrote books about walking in Ireland, you know, sort of walking through that landscape. And he wrote beautifully about that area of Mayo, North Mayo. He starts by describing it as the most sort of desolate and loneliest place you could be. And that because of it, as I said, he goes on to say you're thrown back onto yourself because of that. I think that's it. I think that's what Mayo does, and that area. It throws you back onto yourself, and that's why it has an impact on, I think, all the artists that go there, and everybody that goes there, really, but certainly on all the artists that go to Ballinglen.
What is the temptation for you to go where in your work? What is your when you are doing a painting, you have to train to stop yourself sometimes not to go in somewhere, or?
No, not really, but I always need a motif. So I consider myself very much a figurative painter, even if the more recent paintings have become more minimal. So I need a motif, but I don't know, I don't have any recipes for making them. So I don't know how to make them or how to paint them. That in itself is a certain freedom, I suppose. I used to teach in the academy in Antwerp, and I stopped teaching because I had more doubts than I had solutions.
I can understand.
And that has increased, but I can live with it. And in a way, I think that's the wonderful quality of paint and of painting, is that you never really know. The more you paint, the less you know, and you never really know how to make your paintings. And if you accept that, then you continue making them. But it's also, because of it, it's a lovely adventure, as you will know in your work as well. Huh? You know, when you look at a painting, you look into time, and you go back in time, because you're looking at the surface, but then the surface is often determined by what went before. Even if it's very fragile, even if it's very thinly painted, you still get the feeling of time in a painting, I think.
And I think you also, in a good painting, you always feel the story of painting.
Yes.
Of all the thoughts that has had been done about painting.
Yes.
Because a painter has to measure with this 10,000 years of painting.
Yeah.
And
yes.
in somewhere it's between the who is observing and the painting. There is all this history between also.
Yes, yes, I think so, yeah. And because of it, I think it's nice in a way because you feel that you're just a link in a chain. And that the people that went before you have had a huge influence on you. And also the sense of places because of that, you know. We are who we are because of the people that went before us. And when I'm in Belgium, I often paint a lot about North Mayo, and it's also to do with longing. Maybe that's why they become more and more abstract, because you're really painting a memory or a longing. It's bigger than just a moment. It's many moments.
Yeah, it's already an abstraction in your mind, some kind.
Yeah, I think so.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So perhaps it's even easier.
Well, I don't know. It's more layered anyway, because it's not about a specific something. It's about a whole sort of complex, layered experience.
Memory also, no?
A memory, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very much
Yeah,
so.
but we can be happy that we have this painting, aren't we?
I think we're lucky we have it now, because what would we do in this lockdown without it?
Oh my God! Yes. Also, without lockdown, it's nice. You are walking around and then you go back in studio and work there, or do you also work outside? No, I don't.
I make small watercolors,
Mm-hmm.
and then and take photographs, and I walk around, and then sometimes I start the paintings outside and bring them in. These are small watercolors I made in Canada when I was there and walking, and I'm now going to.
Oh, wonderful!
I'm now going to see some of the watercolors. You know, they've also become fairly abstract, fairly minimal, but to do with sort of hills, and I'm trying to figure out. You know, I'm going to make a painting, an oil painting, and it'll have something to do with these small watercolors. Well, you know, that was an area where I walked a lot when I was there, and yeah, so I make these small watercolors, and I make drawings, and then I go back into the studio, and some of the drawings are sort of black charcoal drawings. I can color here. Yeah. But I paint is very sort of a lot of messy paint. It gets very thick. So I clean my palette all the time, but then the edges build up, and every year or so I burn it all off.
Oh, it's the contrary of the paint. That the paintings are, that your palette is the contrary. It's the edges. They are the hills.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, in the paintings they go away, and here they build up. Yeah, that's true.